Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Austin Bradsher Show, where we give you truth without compromise. I'm your host, Austin Bradsher, and today we're going to be talking about Antifa. We're going to be talking about their siege on the city of Portland in Oregon. We're going to be talking about how Trump has labeled them domestic terrorists. Then we're going to be talking about a whole lot of things. We're going to talk about their history, how the governor, Tina Kotek, her response to Trump, what she had to say about Trump sending federal reinforcements to Portland, Oregon, to back up the ICE federal officers who have been under siege for a while. So we're going to get into a lot of this. We're going to be diving deep into a lot of this. So thank you guys for joining me. Let's dive straight in. So as I get into things, I want to go ahead and begin with Portland itself, which is where Antifa is residing currently. So in the summer of 2020, the city of Portland became a flashpoint. You saw protests very quickly turn into riots. You saw people waving anti-fascist flags, attacking and assaulting federal officers and just officers of the law. You saw groups of people attacking each other, just general violence. And let's fast forward to today. So Trump's administration in its second term has sent federal officers to reinforce the ICE facility there in Portland, which has been under siege for over 100 days. The group Antifa, the organization, if I'm using Trump's words, the organization of Antifa has been occupying this ICE facility for over 100 days. They have been protesting and rioting right outside of it, starting small skirmishes with the officers that are patrolling. So to catch you up to speed, Trump has labeled the organization of Antifa as domestic terrorists. So anyways, all of that being said, the governor, Tina Kotek, who is a registered Democrat, responded by saying this. She said in an interview, and I quote, "It is not lawful deployment under Title X," end quote. So here, obviously, she's referring to Trump's deployment of federal agents to Portland. And since then, the media has run with that, right? But really, what is Title 10? What is Tina Kotek referring to? What is the media not telling you? So Title 10, which governs federal military forces, allows deployment in very specific lawful circumstances, especially when it involves federal officers, federal property, or when a state fails to protect federal functions. So let's pause here because this isn't about politics necessarily. It's about knowing how the government works. What is lawful? What is unlawful? What is justified? What is unjustified? These are important things to know. So before we get any deeper into the law, let's first discuss what is Antifa. So Antifa stands for anti-fascist. These people proclaim themselves as anti-fascists against mainly the Trump administration or anybody who they think is trying to start a fascist regime here in America. And I mean, this sounds noble, right? Like who wants to be pro-fascist? Nobody. This sounds very noble, very brave. They're standing up for what they believe in. But really, this is where the deception begins. Antifa is not really some grassroots humanitarian movement. It's literally a loose network of militant anarchists. So in Portland, this network took form through a group called Rose City Antifa. And this was founded around 2007. So they operate with no formal leadership, but use decentralized organizing, which include Telegram channels, encrypted chats, and social media drops to organize direct action. In this direct action, meaning property damage, assaulting officers, rioting, protesting in large groups to make the officers feel threatened, physical confrontation, intimidation, and chaos under the banner of anti-fascism. These are what Antifa stand for. This is what the organization of Antifa pushes for. So here's an example of where this has happened in the past. In 2020, an Antifa-linked group attacked the Mark O. Hatfield Federal Courthouse in Portland, Oregon. They attacked it with explosives, with lasers pointed at officers. Similar tactics resurfaced in 2024, and again in early 2025 when Trump announced renewed immigration enforcement through ICE against the illegal aliens, against people who illegally came to this country and are criminals. These people call themselves protesters while pointing lasers at federal officers, while threatening to explode a federal courthouse, while assaulting federal officers in a mob. But still, these people still claim that they're peacefully protesting, right? So let's move on to the Trump administration's view and what they've been up to since all this has happened. So when Trump declared Antifa a domestic terrorist organization, he wasn't just exaggerating. He was recognizing a pattern of violence. From attacking officers, to pointing lasers at them, to exploding, to throwing Molotov cocktails. to literally rolling a guillotine in front of the ICE facility in Portland a month ago. This is how dangerous these individuals are. On September 22nd, 2025, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stated, and I quote, "Antifa is going to be designated a domestic terrorist organization. We have seen a rise in violence perpetuated by Antifa radical people across this country." End quote. Senator Bill Cassidy echoed that, saying, and I quote, "Antifa seized upon a movement of legitimate grievances to promote violence and anarchy." End quote. And Trump himself posted, quote, "I'm designating Antifa a sick, dangerous, radical left disaster as a major terrorist organization," end quote. You can criticize the tone, but the facts are there. Antifa's tactics fit the FBI's own definition of domestic terrorism, which reads, and I quote, "Activities intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population or influence government policy through violence or destruction," end quote. So you can't sit here and argue that Antifa's not doing exactly that. That they are not getting the city of Portland and a bunch of other cities riled up against ICE, riled up against these federal officers, against the government, to make violent moves, violent actions against the federal government and rebellion and protest, which are actually riots. Federal officials linked Antifa activists to over 200 documented incidents of arson, assault, and vandalism, and these acts targeting federal facilities and their officers from 2020 to 2024. So let's dismantle Governor Kotek's statement that I stated earlier, in which she said, "It is not lawful deployment under Title 10. So that sounds very authoritative, but it's extremely misleading. So what does Title 10 of the U.S. Code do? So it grants the president authority to use the military in support of federal law enforcement under certain conditions, specifically when states cannot or will not maintain public order that affects federal operations." Tina Kotek, the governor, the mayor of Portland, were both seen leading these protests that eventually turned into riots. They were seen supporting the people in Portland, supporting the illegal immigrants. So it's obvious that these state officials are not doing anything to protect their civilians, to protect the federal properties inside their cities. So under these circumstances, under Title 10, in which Tina Kotek says, oh, it's unlawful for Trump to deploy federal forces, it's exactly wrong, because by not doing anything, by allowing this violence to continue, and not only doing that, but leading this violence, you are endorsing violence against the federal government and the federal government's facilities and the federal government's officers. All of this is wrong. And under Title 10, Trump has the legal authority to send federal deployment to Portland to defend the federal facilities. The Insurrection Act goes further, allowing the president to deploy forces when, quote, unlawful obstructions or rebellion make it impracticable to enforce the laws of the United States. So the question isn't whether the president can act. The question is when and how. And in Portland, federal buildings were attacked, ICE officers assaulted, and state leaders refused cooperation with the federal government. This is textbook justification for federal intervention. And nobody can argue with this. If you want to argue that you want to change Title 10 or you want to change the U.S. codes, go for that argument. But you cannot say that it's unconstitutional, that it's unlawful. That's an invalid argument. You cannot argue that because it is lawful, as I've just proven. So now I just mentioned how it is constitutional. Well, let's talk about it. Article 2 of the Constitution makes the president commander-in-chief in armed forces, not the governor, not the mayor, the president. Article 6 establishes the supremacy clause. Federal law outranks state law when the two conflict. And the federal government is mandated to protect the republic from domestic violence. That means if Oregon refuses to protect federal assets, the federal government must intervene and they must protect federal assets. So our federal government is set up in a way so that if the state fails, that the federal government will take over. So the founding fathers, they foresaw this. They feared both tyranny and anarchy. Both are bad. What you have right now in the Trump administration is not tyranny. And I might make a separate video on why it's not tyranny. but it's very obviously not tyranny. It's very obviously fascism. If anybody's calling the Trump administration fascism, you do not know what fascism is. The fact that you're even calling the Trump administration fascist and you're not getting a bullet through the head is proving that it's not fascist. A fascist government would not allow you to call it fascist, not allow you to criticize them. And there's so many different other arguments that I can say about the Trump administration to defend it, but it is not fascist. And if you still think it's fascist, I think you should go watch my first episode on this podcast, which is all about fascism and explaining what that is and how Trump and Charlie Kirk are not fascists. So here's the irony. Antifa claims to be anti-fascist. They're against fascism. Yet their own tactics are fascistic. They silence speech. They silence anybody who tries to speak out against them. They destroy property. They intimidate opponents. And they completely reject the rule of law that has been set up to protect them. These people are rioting and protesting against something that's designed to protect them and their families. That's how insane they are. These people are insane. They need Jesus. They need God. We need to pray for these people. And I'm going to quote political theorist Karl Popper, which says, and I quote, "Unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. If we extend unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed." End quote. So Antifa's tolerance is simply a mask for tyranny. Now, I want to draw a line because I want to make it very clear that not everybody who is, protesting, who's out in the streets of Portland, Oregon, is actually part of the organization, the domestic terrorist group of Antifa. You've got peaceful protesters in the mix who are exercising their right to free speech, who are expressing their legitimate frustrations with the Trump administration, which they have the right to do. You have the right to peacefully protest, but when that protest turns into riots, that's where it becomes completely wrong. Unless the government actually is wrong, which in this case, I just defended constitutionally and legally, they are not wrong. You have these rioters, they're taking advantage of things, they're smashing, looting, and assaulting people. That's where the line is drawn. You can peacefully protest, you have the right to do so, then again, proving that you're still not in a fascist government. If you're protesting against anti-fascism and you're, like I said, not getting killed for your speech, then you're obviously not under a fascist government. So you have the peaceful protesters, you have the rioters, and then you have the organized cells. You have the ones funded, trained, and coordinated under Antifa ideology. There are people in the mix who are part of the group of Antifa, the terrorist organization of Antifa, in the mix of those peaceful protesters who are stirring things up with federal officers, federal agents, the ICE officers there, the DHS officers. They're stirring things up on purpose, trying to start a riot, trying to start a rebellion. Further proof that federal reinforcements, federal deployment is legally acceptable in this situation under Title 10. So the FBI and DHS both reported Antifa-affiliated groups coordinating across states. They did this using encrypted messaging apps and travel funds to plan direct actions and attacks against federal property, the federal government, the ICE facilities. That's organization. Yet again, proving that this is an organization. So anybody who says that Antifa is just an ideology, it's not an organization. It obviously is an organization. If you guys are linking up and talking using encrypted messaging apps across states to organize riots, how do you not see that that's an organization by definition? That's logistics. That's not some spontaneous righteous uprising, some simple peaceful protest that just popped up in the city of Portland. No, this is organized. This is organized rioting from multiple different states, from multiple different groups in different states that are all affiliated with Antifa, proven by DHS and the FBI. You can't argue against that. It's a fact. So back to Governor Kotek. She says it's unlawful under Title 10. But under 10 U.S.C. Section 12406, the president can call forth the National Guard to suppress insurrection or enforce federal law. And under the Insurrection Act, the president can intervene when the execution of laws is obstructed, which it's clearly being obstructed in Portland, Oregon. Portland's local government failed to stop mobs from targeting federal sites. That's failure to enforce the law. So Governor Kotek's entire argument collapses in on itself. The deployment wasn't unconstitutional. It was constitutional responsibility in action. And here's the reality Tina Kotek ignores. The law doesn't exist to protect mobs. It exists to protect peace, not violence. If you don't want federal response, maintain order locally. Now, I want to bring this home. I want to bring this to a spiritual side, right? Obviously, the Bible has a lot to say about this topic, and I can tie in a lot of different verses from different books across the Bible that have something to do with this. For example, Romans 13:1 says, "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established." So God established, as Christians. I'm assuming most people watching this are Christians. If you're Christian, if you're not, just take this in, right? God established our governments to protect us, to protect justice, to protect peace, which God is all for. When chaos reigns, truth falls silent. Proverbs 28:28 says, "When the wicked rise, people hide themselves, but when they perish, the righteous increase." So when we allow violent groups to rise unchecked, righteousness retreats. But when we stand for truth, for law, and for order, we create space for peace, for justice, and freedom to thrive. So yes, Christians must stand and be against this violence. We should not endorse it. We should not be encouraging it. If you're in Portland and you're part of that mob attacking officers, I would really say check yourself. If you're endorsing or encouraging or cheering these people on from your homes in Texas, from your homes in Iowa, you should check yourself. I'm not saying that out of a place of judgment. I'm saying that out of a place of holding my brothers and sisters in Christ accountable for what they think, for what they are endorsing or encouraging. I would hope you're not encouraging this. Even if you're not necessarily a Republican or a libertarian or whatever, if you call yourself a Christian, you should not be endorsing this. You should not be encouraging this. You should be saying that this violence should end as soon as possible. You should not have cheered on the death of Charlie Kirk. So what is the takeaway from this episode? Well, Antifa is not a myth. It's not an ideology. It's a movement that is dangerous. It's an organization that is dangerous. It's a real decentralized movement that thrives on chaos and disorder. Governor Kotek's claim that federal deployment is unlawful goes against the Constitution, goes against Title X, and goes against the Insurrection Act. So President Trump's administration, whatever your opinion of it is, acted within legal right, within lawful right. And arguably, it's duty to protect civilians, to protect federal property, to protect the republic. These are the foundations and the laws that America was built on to protect us, not to punish us, not to silence us, but to protect us, to provide safety for us. Our nation stands or falls not on politics, but on order and justice. You can't preserve freedom without law. You can't have justice without accountability. So to everyone listening, do not fall for easy headlines. Educate yourself on these topics. Educate yourself on Title X. Ask yourself questions, whether you're a Democrat or Republican or whatever. Ask yourself true questions. When somebody says it's unlawful for this or that, just because they're Democrat and you align with them or whatever, just because they're Republican and you align with them for whatever, doesn't necessarily mean they're right. They're justified when you take a look at the Constitution, when you take a look at the laws put in place, and most importantly, when you take a look at the laws established in the Bible that the Lord our God gave us and commanded us to abide by. So study the law, understand the times, and remember, chaos is not courage and rebellion is not righteousness. And I'm going to leave you with this. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. That's Matthew 5:9. Let's be those peacemakers, standing firm, speaking truth, and defending this great nation. Thank you guys for listening. And for those who just wanted to hear the main message of this episode, that is now over. I'm going to share some personal details about what I'm going to be doing next week. So I'm actually going to be going to Portland, Oregon next week. I kind of feel like a drawing towards there, and I can't really explain it. The Lord is definitely asking me to go there for whatever reason. So I have a few ideas of what I want to do. The Lord hasn't really revealed to me what I'm supposed to be doing there, what he has planned for. So what I plan on doing is I'm just going to be interviewing a few of the peaceful protesters that I'm going to be seeing if they're out. The forecast does look like it's going to be raining, so we'll see. But I'm excited. I mean, not really. I'm also terrified. So if anybody's seeing this before I go to Portland, I would appreciate some prayers for me in this time of uncertainty. Because really, I feel very terrified about this. I feel very scared. I've never done something like this. I'm only 19. And I guess this is part of the reason why God, told me to not go to school, told me to not be in college, is he wanted this to happen for some reason. And maybe, I have another trip later on this year or something. I don't know. I don't know. The Lord works in mysterious ways, but I have a faith and a commitment to him that is unapologetic. And I'm not going to stand down for what I believe is true, what I believe is right, and what I believe the Lord is saying to me. And I'm fairly certain. I am certain that this is the Lord, right? This is the Lord leading me in this direction. So just, if you're seeing this before I go to Portland, pray for my safety. And I know God will protect me. And I'm excited to share and document, and just be a journalist there and share all of it with you and share what it looks like in real time. I'm excited to share all that with you. So, yeah, I will catch you guys in the next episode of the Austin Bradsher Show. Sorry this episode was a little bit late. Make sure you subscribe, follow this channel, go follow my Spotify. If you're on Spotify, rate the show, and go follow all of my socials. They're in my YouTube About page on YouTube. So yeah, I will see you guys next week. Thank you for watching.